The maid had been sleeping in the barn for 5 years until the prince did the unthinkable. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, please tell me in the comments where you are listening to this beautiful story from. I love to know where you are joining me from. The carriage with the royal crest appeared on the gravel road as the sun was setting, and the estate, which at that hour usually breathed calmly, became a hive of activity. Anne was folding sheets in the linen room. Her hands were cold, even though it was spring. The fabric smelled of soap and haste. The door burst open. "Anne!" Mrs. Wamore's voice cut through the air like scissors. "Are you still standing there?" "No, ma'am." Anne looked down, pressed the last fold, and picked up the pile carefully. "There's no margin today, no room for error. Prince William will be here in minutes." Wamore came so close that Han could feel her breath. "And if I say the hallway shines, the hallway shines. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am. And that face, not that face." No one wants to see long faces. "Wash your hands, tie your hair back, and go to the kitchen. You'll serve as soon as the carriage stops. Don't let anything shake you." Anna nodded. She didn't argue. Arguing cost more than she had. She went out into the hallway with the pile of sheets and saw the others running. A waiter with trays, a maid with flowers, the steward Brix with a notebook pressed to his chest as if it were armor. "Where is Mr. Harrow?" Brix asked anyone who would listen. "In the hall, sir. Have someone check the silver and the curtains and the coachman's boots." Brix turned and saw her. "You're Anne." Anne felt the sharp blow to her stomach. It wasn't the first time someone had asked her name, but when a man like Brix asked, it was as if her very existence was about to be evaluated. "Yes, sir." "Good. Don't get too close. Don't ask questions. If they talk to you, answer briefly. If they don't talk to you, all the better." Anne looked down again. "Understood." "Yes, sir." Brix kept walking without waiting any longer. Anne pressed the pile of sheets against her chest and followed. No one asked her if she had slept. No one asked that. In that house, it was taken for granted that bodies took care of themselves, like brooms in the corner. She reached the kitchen and the heat from the pots hit her face. The head cook, Mrs. Collins, was keeping time with a spoon as if conducting an orchestra. "You're coming from upstairs," she muttered, without turning around. "You can feel the commotion from here." "Yes. Well, don't just stand there. I need hands." Collins finally looked at her, and although she wasn't affectionate, her gaze wasn't cruel. "Water for tea, and don't burn yourself today." Anne brought a teapot to the fire. Her fingers moved quickly, precisely. She liked precision. Precision asked no questions. A young maid, Mary, entered with a bouquet of flowers. "They say he's handsome," she whispered with shining eyes. "They say he smells of French cologne." "Mary," Collins cut her off. "Sorry, ma'am." Mary bit her lip and moved closer to Anne, almost pressing herself against her. "Have you seen him?" Anne didn't answer right away, not because she couldn't, but because she knew that any answer was a loose thread. She didn't say in the end. "I haven't seen him." Mary made a face as if disappointed. "Well, I'm going to see him," she whispered and ran to arrange the flowers. Anne poured hot water. The steam moistened her forehead. She felt her heart beating faster, not from excitement, but from that tension that gets into your bones when important people arrive. Important people brought new rules. New rules always found those at the bottom. The sound of wheels outside, voices in the courtyard. "He's here," someone said. Colin straightened his back. "Anne, tray, clean cups. And be careful." Anne took the tray with both hands, held it steady, and followed Mary into the hall. The hall was a world apart from hers. Polished floor, paintings of ancestors, the smell of wax. Lord Harrow stood in the center, smiling as if the estate were a theater and he were the leading actor. Comore stood stiffly beside him. Brick stood behind him with his notebook. The front door opened. A tall young man entered, his dark hair slicked back and his coat perfectly tailored. He didn't need to raise his voice for everyone to feel his presence. His eyes scanned the room calmly, unhurriedly, as if he had seen 1,000 identical hallways and yet was still looking for something. "Your Highness," said Lord Harrow with a careful bow. "What an honor, Lord Harrow." William offered a slight bow. His voice sounded serene. "I'm sorry to arrive unannounced." You would never be a bother, Your Highness. The house is yours. Anne did not look up, but she saw him through the edge of her eyelashes. Her hands held the tray without trembling. At least she could control that. Here, Mary offered, trembling herself. William took a cup, barely touching Mary's fingers. Thank you. Anne took a step forward to offer the tray to Lord Harrow. He took a cup and did not even look at her. It was as if Anne were part of the furniture. Walmore, on the other hand, did look at her. His eyes scanned her apron, her hands, her posture, as if checking for some invisible flaw. Anne, he murmured so no one else could hear. Don't get in the way. Yes, ma'am. Anne stepped back, as if the air in that place did not belong to her. William took a sip and spoke. Impeccable courtesy. I have traveled further than anticipated. I appreciate your hospitality. Of course, Your Highness. We have the rooms ready. Lord Harrow hurried. The blue room with a view of the garden. The blue one is fine. Brigg intervened with a smile. The servants are ready to attend to any need. Anything, Your Highness. Just say the word. William nodded, but his eyes moved again. They did not linger on the moldings or the portraits. They passed over the line of servants, over Whitmore's stiffness, over Mary's slumped shoulders, and for an instant, over Anne. It was barely a second, but Han felt that second as if his name had been called aloud. He lowered his gaze even further and held the tray tightly. How is the season here? William asked. Lord Harrow let out a light laugh. Quiet, Your Highness, the harvests. Hopefully good. People are working. People are always working. William said, almost as a comment to the air. Whitmore smiled stiffly. In this house, Your Highness, effort is appreciated. And clenched her jaw, she said nothing. She had no right to. The conversation continued with clean phrases as if life were easy to organize. William talked about his trip. Lord Harrow talked about the estate. Briggs talked about the suppliers. Anne listened from afar, like someone listening to the rain behind a door. When Whitmore finally snapped his fingers, Anne understood the wordless command. She withdrew with the tray to the kitchen. In the hallway, she let out the breath she had been holding. Mary ran after her. You saw him. He's so handsome. Anne didn't answer. Anne, Mary insisted, laughing. Oh, you're always so serious. Anne stopped for a moment. She looked her in the eyes. Don't get too close, she said quietly. Not today. Mary frowned, confused. Why? Because some looks change things and thought. And when things change, someone has to pay. But she didn't say that. Why wasn't that all she said? She went back to the kitchen. Collins snatched the tray from her and put it on the table. Well? Collins asked without apparent emotion. He's here now, Anne replied. Well, may God find us working. Anne moved from task to task. She served, cleaned, brought up water, brought down dishes. The day stretched out like a taut rope. Every time she crossed a hallway, she felt Whitmore watching her from behind. At one point, Anne carried a basket of sheets to the guest room. She passed a half-open door. She heard William's low voice and another male voice, perhaps Lord Harrow's. It wasn't necessary to prepare so much, William said. When it comes to you, Your Highness, everything must be up to par. Up to whose par? William asked, his tone not sounding annoyed, just curious, and kept walking. She shouldn't listen. She shouldn't. At the end of the afternoon, when the sun had already set, and Whitmore gathered the servants in the service area. Listen carefully, he said. The prince is not staying one night. He is staying several. I don't want any gossip. I don't want any extra steps. If anyone commits an indiscretion, there will be no apologies. There will be consequences. Whitmore's eyes fixed on Anne as if the word indiscretion was meant only for her. Anne held his gaze for a second, just a second. Then she lowered it. She knew how to win small battles. Sometimes the battle was just to keep her face still. Briggs appeared in the background and added, with false kindness, we all want this to be perfect. The estate represents England, and His Highness deserves excellence. And swallowed hard. The estate represented England, yes, and she represented what no one wanted to see. When night finally came and the work slowed down, the house gradually quieted down. The servants retired to their quarters. Mary went to her bunk in the maid's room. Colin sat for a moment, massaged his wrists, and then disappeared through a door. Anne waited. Not immediately, not in a hurry. She always waited until everything was quiet. She washed the last cup, dried the rim, and put it away. Whitmore came through the kitchen to check. His eyes scanned the room. Fine, he said, as if it cost him. Tomorrow I want the floor in the east corridor, spotless, in the dining room without a mark. Yes, ma'am. One more moved a little closer. And you? Don't go where you don't belong, Anne held her breath. No, ma'am. One more walked away satisfied with her threat. Anne stood for a moment with her hands resting on the table, feeling the fatigue in her back like a living weight. Mary poked her head out from the hallway, her hair now loose. Are you coming? Yes, Anne lied. Mary smiled and left. Anne blew out the last candle in the kitchen. Silence spread. Then, as always, she took the path that no one looked at. She left through the back door, careful not to make any noise. The air outside was cold, colder than it had seemed from the kitchen, and pressed her arms against her body. She walked across the yard without turning on any lights. She knew every stone. The barn stood at the back like an old shadow. Upon entering, the smell of straw and damp wood welcomed her as if it were her real bed, and closed the door carefully. The darkness was familiar. She moved forward without stumbling. In one corner, behind sacks and tools, she had her space. It wasn't big, it wasn't comfortable, but it was hers. Or at least it was the only place where she wasn't chased away with a glance. She knelt down and took out a folded blanket. It was rough with patches. On top of it was a piece of cloth she used as a pillow. She sat still for a moment. Her body wanted to sleep, but before lying down, as always, she touched the medallion under her neck. She didn't take it out, she just touched it. It was small, worn, hanging from a thin chain. The metal was warm from her skin. That warmth reminded her that she was not completely alone, even though no one knew it. One day, she murmured silently. She said no more. She settled down. On the other side of the house, William tossed and turned and hemmed it with the ceiling above him like a fixed idea. The blue room was too perfect. The pillow too soft, the silence too clean. He had traveled out of duty, out of habit, out of routine, and now he was there with a strange discomfort. It wasn't tiredness, it was something else. He got up, put on a robe, and walked down the hallway without turning on any lights. He knew how to move without making a sound. He had lived in palaces where every step echoed, and there was always someone listening. He slowly descended the stairs. The house was asleep. That's what big houses said, that they were asleep. But he knew they never slept completely. There was always someone working to sustain the sleep of others. As he passed the dining room, he heard a creak outside. It didn't come from inside, it came from the courtyard as if someone were moving wood. He stopped. It wasn't a guard. He didn't hear firm footsteps. It was a soft, careful sound of someone who didn't want to be seen. William walked to the side door and opened it slightly. The night air hit his face. The sound came again from the barn. William frowned. He didn't think of danger. He thought of worse things, of secrets, of hidden people, of shame that a rich house does not admit. He walked toward the barn with silent steps. The moon helped him enough. The barn door was closed, but not locked. William put his hand on the handle and pushed. A creak inside. Someone moved quickly. A shadow stood up. Anne, who had been about to close her eyes, stood up as if she had been pulled by a rope. Her first impulse was to cover her neck, where the medallion rested. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. Who? William's voice sounded low but clear. Anne recognized the silhouette, even though she couldn't see the full face, the height, the posture, the way he occupied the space, even in a dirty place. Prince Ine felt the cold seeping into her more than just her skin. What are you doing here? She blurted out without thinking and immediately hated herself for the tone. It sounded too direct. She corrected herself instantly by lowering her gaze. I'm sorry, sir, your highness. William stepped inside. The door remained ajar, letting in a sliver of moonlight. I heard a noise, he said. I thought someone was here. Anne swallowed. She didn't know what to say. She didn't have a script for this. Never in 5 years had she had an encounter like this. William looked around the room. There was nothing to steal. There were no hidden luxuries, only straw, sacks, tools in a corner too tidy to be accidental. His eyes fell to the patched blanket, then to Anne's hands, reddened from work. Do you sleep here? He asked, as if the question itself were absurd. Anne clenched her fingers. Yes, yours highness. Since when? Anne hesitated. Lying was the easiest thing to do. saying recently would be less humiliating, but he was already there and his gaze was not Widmore's. It was not mocking, it was bewildered. For a long time, she replied. William waited. He didn't pressure her with shouts, he just waited. And that waiting made it harder for Anne to sustain the lie. 5 winters, she said at last, barely audible. The silence that followed was heavy. William took a deep breath. That's not... He paused. He searched for words that didn't sound like pity. That's not acceptable. Anne looked up for the first time. Her eyes shone, not with tears, but with alertness. That's how it is, Your Highness. And why? William moved a little closer, carefully. There are rooms in the house, and felt a twinge of petty anger, like a spark. Not against him, against the phrase, because there were rooms for others. Because it's not my turn, she replied with a calmness that took effort. And because it's better that way. Better for whom? And clenched her jaw. She wasn't going to say for them, not there, not in front of him. She wasn't going to open that door. It allows me to work, she said. William looked at the blanket again. Then his eyes went to Anne's feet. She didn't have indoor shoes. She had the same worn-out work shoes. Where is your bed? He asked. Anne pointed unproudly to the corner. Here. William took a step toward the corner, and Han felt her body tense as if he were about to discover something he shouldn't. Your Highness, she said quickly. Don't come any closer. William stopped. He looked at her. Why? Anne swallowed. Her hands went to her chest, to the medallion, without thinking. Because her voice broke slightly, she composed herself. Because this is no place for you. William let out a short exhalation, almost a humorless laugh. This is no place for anyone. Anne held his gaze. It's not for me to decide, sir. William watched her for a moment. He seemed to be weighing the weight of his own words. Does Lord Harrow know? Anne asked. She didn't answer right away. If she said yes, she would be blaming him. If she said no, she would be making him look ignorant, and either could be dangerous for her. I work, she said finally. I'm not here to ask questions. William frowned. And Mrs. Wachmore? And felt a wave of shame wash over her as if her skin had been exposed. Wachmore was the closed door in her life. She didn't mention her unless it was necessary. She, Anne, took a deep breath. She organizes the house. William took a step back as if the name had cut him. He looked around. He made a quick, practical decision. Wait, he said. He took off his robe, a thick, good garment, and held it out to her. Anne stood still. I can't, she said. It's a robe, William replied without harshness. It's not an insult. I can't, Annie repeated. If they see me in that, who's going to see her here? Anne held the robe with her gaze as if it were a trap. There are always eyes, she said. William lowered the robe a little. The discomfort on his face grew, but it wasn't anger. It was something closer to frustration. So what do you want me to do? And let out a small, dry laugh without joy. Nothing, Your Highness. I can't do anything if you tell me nothing. Anna clutched the medallion under the fabric. I don't need you to do anything. William stared at her. You're shivering. Anne didn't lie. William raised his eyebrows. He didn't argue with the no as if he were winning a debate. He just registered it. Do you have family? He asked suddenly. Anne felt the ground shift beneath her feet. It was a simple question, and yet it was one of those questions that opens wounds. Yes, she replied and said no more. They lived nearby. Anne swallowed. No, William nodded slowly, as if he understood something she hadn't said. And yet she stays. Anne felt the urge to answer with the truth, the real truth. But that truth was not given to a prince. That truth was kept or lost entirely. Yes, she said. William looked at her hands. You work hard. Anne looked down, like everyone else. No, said William, and for the first time his voice had a soft edge. Not like everyone else. Anne felt a rush of heat to her face. She was embarrassed to be looked at that way. She was also afraid of His Highness. She said, and her tone sounded almost pleading, though she didn't want it to. Please go. If they find you here, who? William asked. Anne hesitated. It doesn't matter, she said. Just go. William watched her, and for a second it looked like he was going to insist, but something in Anne's face, that mixture of discipline and alarm, made him stop. All right, he said, quieter. I'll go. Han barely exhaled. William took a step toward the door, and then he saw it. Not the entire locket, not in detail, but he saw the gesture, the way Anne covered her neck as if hiding an oath. "What's in there?" he asked, unable to help himself. Anne stiffened. "Nothing, sir." William moved a little closer, not aggressively, just curiously. "It doesn't look like anything." Anne took a step back, bumping into a sack. "His Highness," she said with forced firmness. "No." William raised his hands, showing he meant her no harm. He was only asking. Anne clutched the fabric of her shirt at her neck, and the metal of the locket brushed her skin. She felt the chain like a line of fire. William saw a brief glint as the moon touched the edge of the metal. "That," he murmured, "that looks old." Anne felt her throat close up. "Where did you get it?" William insisted. And his voice wasn't accusatory, it was intrigued. Anne shook her head. "It doesn't matter. It matters if William stopped." He didn't know how to finish the sentence. Anne looked at him directly now, with quiet desperation. Her voice came out low, but it trembled for the first time since he entered the barn. "Don't touch it, sir. Some things come at a high price." William stood still. He didn't move forward. He just looked at her as if he finally understood that he wasn't facing an insolent employee, but someone who had been living with the weight of danger for years. "All right," he said, lowering his voice. "I won't touch it." Anne didn't loosen her grip on his neck. "Don't ask any more questions," she added, almost breathlessly. William swallowed. "I don't mean to hurt you." "That's enough," Anne replied, and the word enough came out like a door slamming shut. He held her gaze for a second, then nodded. "I'll leave," he repeated, "but tomorrow I'm going to talk to someone." Anne felt her heart tighten. "No," she said quickly, "don't do that." "Why?" William frowned. "You shouldn't sleep here." "You don't understand," she murmured. "Explain it to me." Anne let out a short, bitter laugh. "What for? So you feel bad and I lose the only thing I have?" William opened his mouth, then closed it. He seemed to be searching for an answer that wasn't pure authority. "I swear I won't do anything without thinking," he said at last. "I won't yell in the dining room or point fingers at anyone." Anne looked at him suspiciously. "Oaths are carried away by the wind," she said. William bowed his head slightly, accepting the blow. "Then I give you my word. A prince's word doesn't mean anything to me," Anne replied, and immediately regretted it. Not because it was a lie, but because it was too honest. William wasn't offended. He just looked at her with a seriousness that made her more uncomfortable than a scolding. "What's your name?" he asked, and hesitated. She already knew. She had heard it in the hall, but at that moment it sounded different, as if her name had some value. "Anne," she said. "Anne," he repeated, as if testing the sound. "I'm William, I know, Your Highness." William exhaled through his nose. "Yes, I know." He took a step toward the door. Before leaving, he paused. "If I ask you something tomorrow, will you answer me?" Anna clutched the medallion tighter, as if it would keep her standing. "It depends on what it is if your question leaves me alive in this house," she said without raising her voice. William was serious for a moment, then nodded again. "Good night, Anne." Anne did not respond with a good night. She just stood still, listening to his footsteps receding on the gravel. When he finally closed the barn door, the darkness was hers again, but it no longer felt the same. She sat down slowly on the blanket and stared into space. Nothing had happened, and yet everything had changed. She brought her hand to her neck and touched the metal carefully. "Please," she whispered. She didn't know if she was saying it to fate or to herself, but don't ruin it. On the other side, William returned to the house with the robe in his arm, as if that object weighed heavily on him too. He went upstairs, entered the blue room, and stood there without lying down. He looked at the immaculate bed. Then, for the first time in a long time, he felt ashamed of the comfort. Dawn broke with a light gray sky. The farm woke up with footsteps and whispers. Anne had already been up for a while, her body stiff from the cold of the night. She came in through the back door, washed her hands with ice-cold water, and tied her hair back. The kitchen smelled of bread and haste. Mary was half asleep, her eyes swollen. "Yes, you slept," she asked, yawning. Anne didn't answer. She concentrated on cutting a loaf of bread. Mary insisted in a low voice. "I saw you leave late. Where did you stay?" "Working," Anne said sharply. Mary wrinkled her nose. "Oh, you always say that." Mrs. Collins appeared with a serious face. "Anne," she said bluntly. Anne looked up. Collins lowered her voice. "Mrs. Whitmore asked about you earlier," and stomach tightened. What did she say? She wants you close today. Very close. Collins didn't sound curious. She sounded concerned. Be careful with your answers. Everyone has ears today. Anne nodded and continued cutting the bread, as if that would calm her. Mid-morning, Mrs. Whitmore entered the kitchen as if she owned the place. Anne, she said without greeting, you're coming with me, and put down what she was holding. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Whitmore led her to the main hallway where the floor gleamed. She made her clean an invisible stain right where everyone walked. I want this to be like a mirror, she ordered. Yes, ma'am. Hoare stood watching as if it were an exam, and knelt down and began rubbing with a rag. She knew what it was, a nameless punishment, a reminder, and above all, a way to keep her in sight. Two servants passed by, lowering their voices. They say last night, one whispered. Shut up, replied the other, and they both quickened their pace. Anne felt a twinge in the back of her neck, not because they were accusing her out loud, but because they didn't need to. The rumor was enough, the strange atmosphere, the way people avoided looking her in the eye. Wilmore leaned forward slightly. Don't get distracted. No, ma'am, and straighten your back, he added, as if her posture were a moral failing. Anne obeyed. Her back was already straight, but she straightened it further. At the end of the corridor, William appeared with a book in his hand. He had no entourage. He walked alone with a calmness that Anne found dangerous. Wilmore straightened instantly. A clever smile. Good morning, Your Highness. William bowed his head. Good morning. His eyes dropped for a second to Anne on the floor, and felt the sting of that look, just like the night before. It wasn't mockery, it was attention. And attention in a house like this was a torch. William spoke in a calm voice. What are you cleaning? Moore let out a discreet chuckle, a small oversight, Your Highness. Nothing important. William looked at the floor. I don't see anything. Hoare held her smile. That's exactly why we maintain standards here. William nodded as if he accepted what. Then he looked at Anne. You're Anne, right? Anne felt the world go silent. She looked up just enough. Yes, Your Highness. Moore blinked rapidly. Her smile tightened. William didn't seem to notice the edge. Anne, can you tell me where the servants' quarters are? Whitmore intervened very softly, very quickly. Your Highness, if you need anything, I can. It's a simple question, William said without losing his composure. I'd like to know. Anne swallowed. If she answered, she'd be getting herself into something. If she didn't answer, she'd look insolent. She felt Whitmore's weight on her, waiting for her to slip up. They're in the West Wing, Your Highness, Anne said, measuring her words carefully. William nodded, and they all sleep there. Anne felt Whitmore's gaze piercing her cheek like a nail. Yes, Your Highness, she lied. Whitmore exhaled almost imperceptibly. William held Anne's gaze a second longer than necessary. Thank you, he said and kept walking. When he was far away, Whitmore crouched down close to Anne's ear. Since when does she speak to you? He whispered. Anne. She continued scrubbing the floor as if she hadn't heard. Whitmore clenched his teeth. I'm talking to you. Anne replied without raising her voice. I just answered your question, ma'am. Watch your tone. Yes, ma'am. Whitmore straightened up. When you're done here, go to the dining room. You're going to help set the table for lunch, and I want you to stop by the administrator's office. He needs to talk to you. Anne felt the blow to her chest. Mr. Bricks. Yes, Whitmore said with satisfaction. Stay close. Don't disappear on me today. Anne squeezed the rag until her fingers hurt. In the dining room, things were worse. Everything was silence and rules. Anne arranged plates, cutlery, and napkins. Mary helped her nervously. Mary leaned close to her ear. Hey, why did the prince ask your name? Anne looked at her. Because he was there. But he doesn't ask just anyone, Mary insisted with that mixture of excitement and fear. Anne set down a knife. Stop talking. Mary swallowed. Sorry. The door opened. Brigg entered, impeccable, as if he never sweated. He stopped when he saw Anne. Ah, he said kindly, just the person I was looking for. Anne's throat felt dry. Good morning, sir. Brigg approached the table and ran his finger across the surface, looking for dust. He found nothing, but his gesture was the same. To show he could, how's everything going, Miss Anne? He asked. Fine, sir, Brigg smiled. Good, I like to hear that. Mary tried to leave, but Briggs raised a hand. You wait outside, he said to Mary without looking at her. Mary obeyed as if she had been pulled. Brick stood in front of Anne, his voice lowered. There have been certain questions this morning. Anne stood her ground. I don't know what you mean, sir. Brix raised his eyebrows. What he means is that His Highness is curious, and curiosity in a house like this as can be inconvenient. Anne did not respond. Brigg paced slowly around the dining room. Tell me, Anne, did you have any encounter with His Highness last night? Anne felt heat rise to her face. She did not want to lie, but she could not tell the truth either. No, sir, she said. Brick stopped. Are you sure? Anne held his gaze with her eyes downcast. Yes, sir. Brix let out a soft chuckle. How strange, because one of the farmhands said he saw a shadow near the barn. Han felt a chill run down her spine. Farmhands imagine things, she dared to say without raising her voice. Briggs smiled, but this time his smile didn't reach his eyes. Imagining is not a crime, he said, but speaking can be, especially when talking about His Highness. Anne pressed her lips together. Brix changed the subject as if nothing had happened. After lunch, I need you to go to the pantry and make a list of what's missing. Collins is distracted. Yes, sir. Brix took a step toward her. And another thing, Anne. Anne barely looked up. Be prudent, he said still kindly. Prudence keeps people in their place. Anne lowered her gaze. Yes, sir. Brigg left as if nothing had happened. Anne stood still for a second, then continued setting the table, but her hands no longer responded the same way. The medallion weighed heavily on her neck, as if it knew someone was looking for it. Lunch was a dance. Anne went in and out with platters, water, bread. William was seated to Lord Harrow's right. They talked about country matters and roads. Whitmore moved nearby like a cat guarding milk, and avoided looking at William. She didn't want to give Whitmore ammunition, but she felt it nonetheless. At one point, while serving water, William spoke without turning around much. Lord Harrow, your estate seems very well managed. Harrow smiled. Briggs is an efficient man, and Mrs. Whitmore is a pillar of strength. Whitmore bowed his head. I do my best, Your Highness. William took the glass and said as if it were a casual comment. I'm interested to know how you arrange the servants' quarters in houses in this region. Whitmore's fork clinked softly against his plate. It was a tiny sound, but Han heard it like thunder. Harrow cleared his throat. Oh, it's traditional, Your Highness. The men in one wing, the women in another. Do they all have beds? William asked, still calm. Brigot spoke up from behind where she was standing to assist. Of course, Your Highness. People are taken care of here. Servants are essential. Anne felt a pang of anger. Essential. Yes, as long as they weren't noticed. William nodded slowly. I'm glad to hear that. And continued serving as if she hadn't heard. But inside, every word was a step toward the edge. After lunch, Whitmore intercepted her in the service hallway. Come, she said curtly, and followed her. Whitmore led her to a small room where tablecloths were stored. She closed the door. What did you say to him? Whitmore blurted out without preamble. Anne opened her mouth, but Whitmore cut her off. Don't look at me with that innocent face. The prince is asking about rooms. He asks about beds. Why? Whitmore moved closer. What did you do last night? Anne felt the air leaving her. Nothing, ma'am. Whitmore looked her up and down, searching for cracks. Your lie is too clean, he said. That bothers me. Anne swallowed. I just work. Whitmore laughed humorlessly. Yes, you say that. And yet he mentions you. Anne clenched her fists at her sides. She couldn't say he found me in the barn. She couldn't say he saw me. If she did, Whitmore wouldn't just fire her. He'd bury her. His Highness talks to anyone who crosses his path, Anne said as neutrally as possible. Whitmore stared at her as if he wanted to see right through her. Listen to me carefully, he said, lowering his voice. I don't care about your life. I care about my house. I care about order. If you're a thorn in my side, I'll get rid of you. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. Whitmore moved closer. And don't you dare try to make yourself interesting. Women like you. She stopped before saying too much. She corrected herself coldly. People like you don't survive scandal. Annie felt the blow, but she stood her ground. I don't want any scandals, ma'am. Then you'll obey. Yes, ma'am. Moore slammed the door open. Go to the pantry and then to Brix's office. Don't keep him waiting. Anne walked out with stiff legs. In the pantry, she tried to concentrate, counting sacks of flour, jars of spices, bottles of vinegar. She made a mental list so she wouldn't get lost, but her head was filled with a single thought. Maybe not everything, but you know something. Collins came in drying his hands. What are you doing here, he asked. A list, said Anne. Collins looked at her. You look pale. I'm fine. Collins closed the door with his foot in one swift movement. I'm only going to ask you this once, Anne. Did you get yourself into trouble? Anne hesitated. Collins wasn't her friend, but she wasn't her enemy either. She was the closest thing to a wall that didn't fall down. Anne didn't lie again. Collins looked at her with weary patience. You don't sound like yourself, and gripped her pencil. It's just a weird day. Collins lowered her voice. Be careful with W. Moore. When that woman smiles, someone cries. Anne let out a breath. I know. Collins looked at her for another second. Where did you sleep last night? And froze. Collins didn't move. She didn't seem to be judging. She was just waiting. Anne looked down. As usual, Collins pressed her lips together. Just look, and felt shame rising like fire. Don't say it, she begged, not wanting it to sound like a plea. Collins raised a hand. I won't say it, but it makes me angry. He paused. The prince found out. And opened her mouth and couldn't lie to him easily. Collins already knew too much. Besides, there was no malice in Collins's gaze. He saw me, she confessed, her voice almost gone. Collins exhaled as if receiving inevitable news. Oh, child, don't call me that, Anne said quickly. I'm not S. I know. Collins cut her off. You're not a child, that's why I'm telling you this with anger. And clenched her pencil. If this gets out, I'll lose my job. Collins shook his head. Sleeping on straw isn't work, it's punishment. Anne felt her chest tighten. I chose to endure it. Collins looked at her with a strange mixture of respect and sadness. No one chooses that if they have a choice. Anne didn't answer. She couldn't explain the reason. Not completely, it was her secret, her lifeline. Collins took the list from her hands. Finish quickly, and when you go to Bricks, don't stay alone if you can help it. I can't help it, said Anne. Collins gave her back the list. Then speak little and don't accept anything you don't understand. Anne nodded. She left the pantry with the list in her hand, as if it were a plank in the middle of the water. The hallway to the administrator's office seemed longer than usual. With every step she took, she felt someone watching her. She didn't see anyone. But fear doesn't need eyes to exist. Before she knocked on the door, she heard voices inside. Bricks's soft voice. Another voice. Whitmore's. Even lower. Anne stood still. We have to nip this in the bud, Whitmore said. I'm already handling it, Bricks replied, but we have to do it cleanly. Her Highness must not find out about anything. Whitmore interrupted and felt her hands sweating. Brick's voice lowered further. Don't worry, if she cooperates, it'll be quiet. What if she doesn't? Asked Whitmore. There was a brief silence. Then Brick said, then we'll have to give her a reason to cooperate. And clenched her teeth and tried to swallow, but couldn't on the first try. Her throat was dry. She knocked softly on the door. Come in, said Bricks, as if he had been waiting. Anne entered. The office smelled of ink and paper. Bricks was sitting behind the desk, impeccable. One more was standing to one side with his arms crossed. The window let in a cold light. Anne stood by the door with the list in her hand. Sir, she said formally. Bricks smiled as if they were friends. Anne, how punctual. She asked me for the list, she said, handing it over. Bricks didn't take it right away, leaving it there on the edge of the desk as if the list didn't matter. Yes, the list, he repeated slowly. But first I want to clear up something. Anne felt her back tense. Moore said nothing, just looked at her with barely contained satisfaction, as if he were finally going to see Anne break. Bricks slowly opened a drawer. The sound of the wood was louder than normal in the silence of the office. He took out something small and placed it on the table. Anne felt the world slipping away from under her feet. It was her locket. Not a replica, not a similar one, hers. She recognized it by the worn edge, by a scratch she herself had noticed 1,000 times. Han looked up with a rush of air in her chest. Where from? She began, but the words wouldn't come out. Bricks tilted his head. Kind. That's right. We're here to talk, Anne, he said. Because this object shouldn't be with you, and the house wants to know what else you've taken. Anne was speechless. The locket on the table seemed larger than it was, as if it had grown with fear. Brix pushed it slowly with one finger, as if moving a chess piece. "Speak," he said softly. "Where did you get it?" In swallowed, feeling her neck bare as if the chain were still pulling at her. "It's mine," she managed to say. Whitmore let out a short, joyless chuckle. "Sure, and I'm the queen." Brig raised a hand, asking for calm. "We don't need sarcasm, Ms. Whitmore. We need the truth." Anna clenched her fists at her sides. "I didn't steal anything, sir." Brig looked at her with feigned pity. "That word stolen sounds ugly. I prefer to say there are misunderstandings, and misunderstandings can be cleared up if one cooperates." Anne felt the air in the office grow heavier. Whitmore approached the desk and leaned toward Anne, resting a hand on the edge. "You thought you were very clever, didn't you? With your serious little face. With your silence." Anne didn't answer. Her silence was all she had left. Brig took the list from the pantry and reviewed it as if he were interested. "This is fine. You're useful. No one denies that." Wilmore let out an exaggerated sigh. "It's not enough to be useful when you bring problems." Brix put the list aside. "Let's make this simple, Anne. His Highness is an important visitor. He asks questions, and you, for some reason, are close to those questions." Anne kept her eyes down. "I just answered what he asked me." "Aha," said Brig. "And last night, where were you?" Anne felt her skin bristle. Wilmore crossed his arms. "Let's see if you're going to say you were working now, too." Anne took a deep breath. "I was in the kitchen until late." Brick smiled slightly. "That doesn't answer the question," and clenched her jaw. "I went to rest." Moore stepped forward impatiently. "Where, Anne? Where did you go to rest?" Anne felt the medallion burning, even though she wasn't wearing it. Brix tilted his head slightly. "Look, we don't have to make this unpleasant. But if you insist on playing games, the house will protect itself. And when a house protects itself, the ones who are left over leave." Anne finally looked up directly at Brits. "I'm not playing." Brick held her gaze without blinking. "Then don't force me to take action." "What action?" Anne let herself stop. Wilmore smiled, satisfied that Anne was finally showing something. Brick spoke as if he were explaining a procedure. Change of position, recommendation, transfer. There are farms that need workers, places farther away, places where no one asks about an employee. I felt a blow to her stomach. It wasn't the job, it was the distance. Far away meant losing her last chance. "You can't send me," she said, and the tremor betrayed her voice. Wilmore took a step forward, enjoying himself. "Of course we can," Brix corrected her softly. "We can, if we want to, but we don't want to. We want calm. We want this to pass without noise." Anne breathed slowly so as not to break down. Brix pointed to the medallion. "I found this on you. If something like this turns up, the question is, what else are you hiding?" Anna pressed her lips together. "Nothing." Wilmore let out a dry laugh. "Liar." Brix leaned forward. "Anne, listen, give me a reasonable explanation, and this will be over today. Tell me you found it, that you didn't know you were going to return it. I'll scold you, let you keep working, and that's it." Anne looked at him in disbelief. "And if I say that, then it all comes down to your clumsiness," Briggs replied. "A forgivable clumsiness," and felt it was a trap with a bow on top. Wilmore spoke in a low, venomous voice. "And you stay in your barn, where you belong." Anne felt the heat rise to her face. "Not me." Brig raised his hand, cutting her off. "We're not going to talk about that, not now." Anne swallowed hard. If she accepted that mistake, she was admitting to theft. The house could use it whenever it wanted. If she didn't accept, they could kick her out today. Brigadier, a blank sheet of paper and an inkwell toward her. "Write just a note, one line. I took this by mistake and I'll return it, and that's it." Anne looked at the pen as if it were a sentence. "No," she said softly. Moore clicked his tongue. "Look at her. She thinks she's entitled." Brix didn't lose his smile. "And don't make this difficult." Anne straightened her back. "I'm not signing anything." Silence fell like a lid. Briggs smiled for the first time. He wasn't angry. He became cold. Then he said slowly, "We're going to have to talk about your place in this house." Han felt her chest tighten. Whitmore took a step towards her. It was about time. And clenched her fists, but kept her voice calm. I comply, you comply, Whitmore repeated mockingly. You comply when it suits you. You comply until someone important looks at you. Anne felt the sting of those words, not because they were true, but because Whitmore knew where it hurt. She grabbed the medallion and put it in the drawer without haste. You can go, Anne, for now. Anne didn't move. Give it back to me. Whitmore chuckled again. Oh, now you want it. Bricks shook his head calmly. No, for everyone's sake, it stays with me so it won't get lost again. It's mine, Anne insisted with restrained anger. Bricks looked at her as one might look at an insect that had suddenly raised its head. Nothing here is yours, Anne. You're allowed to be here. Don't confuse the two. Anne felt like screaming. She didn't. Screaming would mean losing. She turned and left the office with firm steps. But inside, she was falling apart. In the hallway, Mary was waiting, restless. What happened? She whispered as she approached. Anne walked past her. Nothing. Mary followed her 2 steps. I saw you come in with that look on your face. Did they scold you? Anne stopped dead in her tracks and Mary almost bumped into her. Mary said, lowering her voice, don't follow me. Mary blinked. Just don't follow me, Anne repeated. And Mary stood still, hurt. Anne continued walking toward the kitchen, her heart pounding in her throat. Colin saw her come in and knew immediately. What did they do to you? He asked bluntly. Anne shook her head, clenching her teeth. Nothing. Colin set his spoon down on the table. Don't lie to me. Anne stared at the floor. They took something from me. What? Anne hesitated for a second. Then she whispered, almost without a voice. My locket. Colin's eyes widened. How did they have it? Anne said, shame sticking to her palate. In the office, as if I had taken it. Collins clenched his jaw. Those ones. And looked up imploringly without meaning to. Don't say anything. Collins lowered his voice. Did they make you sign anything? No, Collins nodded seriously. Good. Don't sign anything. Not a word. Anne swallowed. They threatened to send me away. Collins exhaled. Annoying. Of course, that's what they do when they can't control you. Anne pressed her fingers against the table. I can't leave. Collins stared at her. Why? Anne felt the urge to tell him everything, but she stopped herself. Her secret wasn't hers alone. I can't, she replied. Collins, he didn't insist. He just lowered his voice even more. Then listen, His Highness is acting strange today. He's asking questions. And that bothers Whitmore. Anne felt a chill. Don't ask questions. That's not for you to decide, Collins said. But you do decide how much you expose yourself. Anne swallowed hard. I didn't seek him out. Collins held her gaze with a brief sadness. No, but he found you. As if fate wanted to confirm those words, the kitchen door opened and William appeared. He didn't enter ceremoniously, just peeked in as if looking for someone specific. Collins straightened immediately. His Highness. William bowed his head. Mrs. Collins, right? Collins blinked in surprise that he knew her name. Yes, Your Highness. Apologies for the interruption, William said. His gaze swept across the kitchen and paused for a second. I need to ask a few questions about the house. Simple questions. Collins glanced sideways at Anne as if warning her without words. Of course, Your Highness, Collins replied. Who should I call? No need to call anyone, William said calmly. I just want to understand how the service is organized. How many people work here, where they rest, how their time is divided. Collins hesitated for a moment. Then he replied carefully, There are separate areas, Your Highness. Mrs. Whitmore is in charge of that organization. William nodded. Yes, I imagined as much. Anne felt the air tense. William looked at Collins and lowered his voice slightly. I'm going to ask you something directly, he said. Are the employees treated fairly here? Collins pressed his lips together. It was a question with hidden venom. If he said no, he would get into trouble. If he said yes, he would betray himself. Anne felt Collins take a deep breath. Your Highness, Collins said slowly, in a house like this, they are treated as is customary. William held his gaze. That's not an answer. Collins swallowed. It's the only one I can give you without neglecting my job. William understood something. His expression changed, not to anger, but to determination. Could you speak with me privately for a moment? William asked. Collins tensed. Your Highness, just a moment, William insisted, and not to cause trouble, but to prevent injustice, and felt her chest tighten. Injustice. That word was not used aloud. There. Collins looked at Anne again. Anne looked down as if asking him not to mention her. Collins nodded cautiously. Yes, Your Highness. William pointed to the door. This way. Collins wiped his hands on his apron and went out with him. Anne stayed in the kitchen with her heart pounding. Mary looked at her from the other table, full of questions and fear. What does he want with you? Mary whispered. Nothing with me, Anne said weakly. But that wasn't true. Anne knew it. Everyone knew it. The afternoon passed like a tightrope. Umar came and went with absurd orders, keeping Anne busy and visible. Bring water, come back, clean this, go get that, as if every extra step were part of the punishment. At one point, Umar stood in front of Anja. You're going to take this to the prince's room, he said, and looked up, alarmed. Me? Umar smiled. Yes, you. Anne felt the blow, but he always sends Mary. Not today, said Umar. Today you go, and you go quietly. Anne took the tray with steady hands, though inside she was trembling. She knew Whitmore wanted to provoke an encounter or blame her for one. She climbed the stairs, each step weighing heavily on her. When she reached the guest quarter, she took a deep breath and knocked on the door of the blue room. Come in, William's voice was heard, and opened the door slowly. She entered with her eyes downcast. His Highness said formally. William was standing next to a table with papers. He looked up and saw her. His expression changed slightly, as if it hurt him to see her there. Anne, he said without thinking, and felt the name like a wave of heat. I brought what Your Highness ordered. She set the tray on a side table. William took 2 careful steps closer. It's okay, and almost laughed. The question was absurd, and at the same time it was the only human thing she had heard in hours. Yes, Your Highness lied. William looked at her seriously. Don't lie to me. And clenched her jaw. I can't stay, sir. William lowered his voice. They did something to you, and took a step toward the door. I have work to do, Anna, William insisted, his tone not authoritative but urgent. Last night you asked me not to do anything. Today I saw you and I saw something strange. What's going on? Anne stood still with her hand on the doorknob. She knew that if she spoke, she would break a line she had been holding for 5 years. William moved a little closer, but kept his distance. I don't want to put you in danger, I just want to understand. Anne exhaled slowly. Understanding doesn't change anything. Yes, it does, William said. If there's abuse, if there's something wrong, I can intervene. Anne turned her head slightly. It's easy to intervene when you're leaving. William stood still. I'm not insensitive. Anne let out a joyless laugh. I didn't say that. William took a deep breath. Then tell me what you need. Anne closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, her voice was low and tight. I need you to stop asking questions, she said. William blinked. That means you need me to shut up. Anna squeezed the doorknob. Yes, because if you keep going, they'll kick me out. Who? William asked more firmly. Which more bricks, Lord Harrow? Anne didn't answer. That was the dangerous part. The names. William took another step without invading her space. Anne, this house can't do that to you if you haven't done anything wrong. Anne let out a breath through her nose. You talk as if things are fair because they should be. William was silent for a second. Anne continued before she lost her nerve. They took something from me today. They put it on the table as if I were a thief, William frowned. Anne hesitated, but she had already said too much to back down. A medallion, she said, the one I saw last night. William lowered his voice. Anne nodded slightly. William clenched his jaw. They took it from me in the administrator's office. Anne didn't answer, but her silence was answer enough. William walked toward the table with papers, as if driven by rage, and then stopped. He forced himself to breathe. I'm going to talk to him, he said. Anne spun around. No, Anne, she repeated, and for the first time her voice truly trembled. If you talk to him, you'll make it worse. William stared at her. I can't pretend I didn't see what I saw. Anne gripped the doorknob until it hurt. Then pretend. William froze. That's what you're asking me to do. Anne swallowed hard. I'm asking you not to ruin me. William opened his mouth to reply, but Anne interrupted him desperately. If you go on, They'll drag us all down. You too, Your Highness. William looked at her in surprise. Me, Anne didn't explain. She couldn't, she just whispered. You don't know these people when they get scared. There was an awkward silence. William lowered his voice. I'm not afraid of them getting angry. I'm afraid of you continuing alone. And felt her throat close up. That sentence was dangerous because it touched a part of her that she had kept locked away. I'm not alone, she lied. William looked at her as if he didn't believe her. Where are you sleeping tonight? Anne froze. William held her gaze. Anne swallowed. I have work to do, she said, and finally opened the door. Excuse me. She left before the air could break her face. In the hallway, Whitmore was waiting at the end, as if she had guessed the exact moment. She didn't run up to her. She didn't shout. She just looked at her with a small, venomous smile. Anne walked toward her with the now empty tray. She tried to walk past her. Whitmore leaned to the side, blocking her way. What did she say to you? She asked very quietly, and pressed her lips together. Nothing. Whitmore tilted her head. And what did you say to her? And held her gaze without answering. Whitmore smiled more. I thought so. He stepped aside to let her pass, and as Anne walked by, one more whispered, Tonight you sleep where I say. And felt a distinct chill. She went downstairs with her stomach in knots. In the kitchen, Collins looked at her as soon as she entered. Did you go to the prince's room? She asked tensely. Anna felt it. Collins clenched her jaw. Woomore sent you, didn't she? Anne nodded again. Collins exhaled through her nose. That woman is up to something. Anne didn't answer. She started washing dishes as if she felt nothing. The afternoon wore on. Night fell. The house ate dinner. The house went quiet. The house pretended to be normal. And waited for everything to be quiet as usual. But that night, Wishmore wouldn't let her move around alone. He sent her to fold clothes in a room where everyone passed by. He sent her to sweep a hallway where every footstep could be heard. And when it finally seemed like no one was watching her, Hans slipped out the back door, her heart racing. She wasn't going to sleep. She still needed to check something. She walked quickly toward the barn. The night was cold, the moon barely shining. She went in and closed the door carefully. She went straight to her corner. She didn't sit down. She didn't arrange the blanket. She crouched down next to a beam where the wood had a small opening hidden behind a sack. Her fingers found the exact edge, as always. There, for a long time, she had kept the only thing she couldn't lose. A folded piece of paper protected by cloth, away from prying eyes. She reached in, felt straw, felt dust, reached in deeper. Nothing. Her heart rose to her throat. Anna pulled the sack away with contained desperation, felt the wood, and searched for the hole. Her fingers found only air. Anne remained crouched, her hand in the hollow as if the paper would appear out of shame. Nothing. She slowly withdrew her hand, her fingers trembling. No, 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 she murmured. Clenching her teeth so as not to raise her voice, she put her hand back in, touched wood, straw, dust. Nothing. She stood up, feeling slightly dizzy, and looked around, even though there was no one there. The barn was the same, and yet it felt different, as if it were no longer her hiding place, but a cage. She heard a creak near the door. Anne froze. You don't have to hide, Anne, said a soft voice. Wilmore Anne didn't turn around immediately. She forced herself to breathe. If she ran, she lost. If she screamed, she lost. She turned at last. Wilmore was there, silhouetted by the moonlight, her hands folded as if she were in her living room. What are you doing here, ma'am? Inslana asked as best she could. Wilmore smiled with almost false tenderness. I came to see if you were obeying. Anne swallowed. I obey. Yes. Horde took a step inside. Then why are you here? I told you that tonight you sleep where I say, and clenched her fists inside her apron. I came for my blanket. Widmore looked at the corner as if inspecting an animal. Oh, your corner. 5 winters, right? How persistent. Anne held his gaze without saying anything. Widmore walked slowly toward the sacks. He crouched down a little, poked his shoe tip right where Anne had been searching, as if he knew exactly where to look. Looking for something else? He asked quietly. Anne felt her heart pounding against her ribs. No, Widmore raised his eyebrows. No. That's strange because I saw you reach in there, like you were hiding candy, and clenched her jaw. I'm not hiding anything. Widmore stood up and moved closer. Don't lie. You're a terrible liar for someone who thinks she's so righteous. Anne took a step back until she felt the wood behind her back. Widmore lowered his voice even more. I'll spell it out for you so you don't play dumb. You have nothing to keep. Nothing. If you think you have something, it's going to slip through your fingers. Do you understand? Anne breathed slowly through her nose. I understand that you want to scare me. Wilmore chuckled. I don't scare. I give orders and you obey or you disappear. Anne swallowed hard. That's what he wants. Wilmore looked at her as if he enjoyed the question. I want peace and you are noise. A little noise that His Highness heard. Anne felt the blow of the name like a door slamming shut. Wilmore moved within an inch of her. Now you're coming with me. There's a room where you can sleep. A room with walls. Isn't that what you want? Anne didn't answer because she knew the hidden price. Wilmore smiled with satisfaction. Ah, you understand. That room exists if you behave yourself, if you don't ask questions, if you don't look at His Highness, if you don't breathe too much. And clenched her teeth. I didn't provoke anything. Wilmore tilted her head. But he looks at you, and held her gaze, and her voice came out firmer than she expected. I can't control that. Wilmore gave a light pat in the air near her shoulder, without quite touching her. Then control what you can, your mouth, and felt like crying. Not out of sadness, but out of anger. She didn't. Let's go, Wilmore ordered it. Anne took the blanket and followed her, walking behind her as if nothing had happened. They entered the house through the back door. The heat hit her face and felt her throat loosen a little. Wilmore led her down a narrow hallway away from the maid's quarters. They came to a small door. There, said Wilmore, and opened it. It was a small storage room with a narrow cot. There was a small window. It wasn't a real room, but it was a roof over her head. Wilmore stood in the doorway. Look how generous I am, and laid the blanket on the cot. Wilmore spoke with poisonous calm. If His Highness asks again tomorrow, you will say that you are fine, that you have always slept here, that the house takes care of you. Yes, and looked up. That's a lie. Wilmore smiled. Lies keep houses standing, and pressed her lips together. Wilmore snapped her fingers. Answer me. Anne swallowed. Yes, ma'am. Widmore nodded as if closing a deal. Very well, and I'll warn you about something else. Brix is patient, but he's not stupid. If you get difficult, he has ways. You saw that. Anne felt the hollow of fear where her role had been. Wardio took a step back. Sleep. Tomorrow there's a formal dinner, and you're going to serve with a calm face. She closed the door. From the outside. Anne stood with her hand on the doorknob, listening to the footsteps recede. She took a deep breath, looked at the key, looked at the blanket. Roof, she muttered bitterly. Roof with a chain. She sat on the edge of the cot and brought her hand to her neck out of habit. She remembered that she no longer had the medallion. The empty space frightened her more than the cold of the barn. She didn't sleep. As soon as she closed her eyes, she saw the empty hole in the beam. At dawn, the house began to move again, and washed her face, combed her hair, and left before anyone called her. In the kitchen, Collins was checking the bread. Collins saw her and opened his eyes wide. Where were you? And lowered her voice. More locked me in a room. Collins let out a breath. Which room? A small one upstairs near the attic hallway. Collins frowned. That's not a favor, that's control. And felt her teeth clench. They took what I had hidden. Collins put the bread aside. What you had hidden in the barn. And hesitated for half a second, but Collins was already on the inside. Yes, she admitted. It's gone now. Collins looked at her with hard seriousness. Are you sure you didn't move it? I'm sure, Anne said, her voice breaking with pure anger. I touched it every night. Collins clenched his jaw. Then they found it and swallowed. Oh, they knew before. Collins pointed a finger at her as if marking a path. Don't break down. Not today. Today there's dinner. Today His Highness will be surrounded, and if he asks, they'll use you. Anne ran a hand over her forehead. I already asked him not to ask. Collins shook his head. Men like him don't know how to stay quiet when they see injustice. Anne let out a joyless laugh. It's not injustice to them. It's custom. Colin stared at her. To some, it is injustice. And if he turns out to be one of those, be careful because he can save you or sink you without meaning to. Before Anne could respond, Mary entered with a tray and a frightened look on her face. Anna, she said in a hurry, Mrs. Whitmore is looking for you. Anne closed her eyes for a moment. Wow, Mary grimaced. She says you're serving in the main dining room today, that you'll be close to him. Collins looked angry. Of course. Anne took a deep breath. I'm coming. She went up to the dining room through the service door. Mrs. Whitmore was there, giving orders as if she were directing a play. Ah, she said when she saw her. At last you'll be at the main table, not behind it to one side. Anne felt the blow. Ma'am, normally there is no prince. Whitmore cut her off. And don't contradict me. I want His Highness to see impeccable service. And you have quick hands. That suits me. Anne clenched her jaw. Yes, ma'am. Whitmore leaned closer and lowered her voice. And remember what we talked about. Calm face, nice answers. Anne sensed it without looking at her. The day passed with preparations, silver wine, candles. Anne was involved in everything. Loading, cleaning, tidying up. Every hour felt like a tighter rope. In the afternoon, William appeared in the service corridor, something no one of his rank ever did. He didn't enter the kitchen, but stood in the doorway. Colin saw him and came out. Anne watched him from inside, pretending to wash dishes. She saw Collins talk to him, his body tense as if he were choosing his words carefully. William nodded several times, then looked toward the kitchen. His eyes met Anne's for a second. Anne quickly looked away. When night fell, the large dining room was lit with candles and measured voices. Guests from nearby estates arrived, not many, but enough to make it all feel like theater. Lord Harrow smiled as if the world owed him applause. Brick moved behind him, attentive. O'More looked proud, and entered with a platter and felt the stairs without seeing them. The people upstairs looked at the servants as one looks at a tablecloth. If it's clean, you don't notice it. If it's stained, it becomes an issue. William was at the head of the table. He didn't look comfortable. His smile was polite, but his eyes were restless. Moore nodded, and Anne stood near the main table, ready to serve. A lady guest in an elegant dress whispered to another, "They say His Highness inspects houses." "How funny," the other replied in a low voice. "You can tell he's young. Young people think they can fix everything." Anne clenched her fingers on the tray. William spoke in a friendly tone, looking at the guests. "I'm glad you came. Lord Harrow has told me about the harvests." "This year looks promising," replied an older man. William nodded, "And with harvests come accounts. I've always found it interesting how accounts are kept on estates." Bricks tensed slightly but smiled. "With order, Your Highness." "I hope so," said William, still calm, "because a small mistake on paper can become a big one in life." Anne felt that phrase brush against her skin. Lord Harrow let out a light laugh. "Your Highness thinks practically." "I think about the human aspect," William corrected softly. He poured himself some soup. Anne approached carefully. When she placed the ladle on a guest's plate, Whitmore approached behind her, too close as if to remind her that he was watching her. William continued as if discussing the weather. "Lord Harrow, which supplier do you use for flour?" Harrow blinked. "Oh, several. Brigg knows." Brick stepped forward, smiling knowingly. "The Turner family, Your Highness, and a merchant from York." "Turner," William repeated. "The Turners of East Riding." Briggs nodded. "The very same, Your Highness." William took a sip of wine. "Curious. I know someone who had problems with deliveries from that family. Payments that didn't add up. Nothing serious, but it happens a lot." Brigg kept smiling, but his neck tensed. "In this house, everything adds up, Your Highness." "That's good," said William. "Then you won't mind showing me a couple of books." "I'm picky, I admit." The guest chuckled, politely. Lord Harrow snorted, but his smile seemed fixed. "Of course, Your Highness," said Harrow. "Whenever you like." "Tomorrow morning?" William asked without pressure, as if it were normal to ask. Briggs stepped forward. "Your Highness has plans. Surely we wouldn't want to intrude." "Yes, I have plans," said William, cutting him off with firm courtesy. "My plan is to understand." Brief silence. One more, unable to intervene in that matter, focused on Anne. He made a slight gesture with his fingers, ordering her to move faster. Anne obeyed. During the second course, a guest commented, They say there's a lot of talk about reform in London. William smiled faintly. In London, they talk about everything. Here, on the other hand, people live. They live well, added a lady, looking around as if the candles were proof. William nodded and his eyes moved to Anne for a second without lingering too long. Some live well, said Heropio. Your Highness, another drink? No, thank you, replied William. I prefer to keep a clear head. Briggs stiffened for a moment and then resumed smiling. Whitmore decided to attack from another angle. He approached the main table with a tray of bread and, with a seemingly casual gesture, placed Anne directly in front of William at an uncomfortable distance. Anne, serve quickly, Whitmore said loudly so that the guest could hear her. She is one of the most disciplined. A guest smiled. It shows. William looked at Whitmore. Discipline shouldn't come at the expense of health. Whitmore blinked, and his smile remained by sheer force of will. Health is taken care of here, Your Highness. William put down his cutlery for a second. Then I'm glad to hear that the employees get proper rest. Whitmore held on to his smile. Of course. Anne felt a pang of fear. Whitmore was lying with ease, and she had to bear the burden of that lie. Dinner progressed, and William did not raise his voice once. He did not accuse, he did not point fingers, he only asked questions. And each question was a noose around Brix's neck. Finally, the guests rose with courtesies. Lord Harrow bid them farewell with smiles. Brix breathed a sigh of relief too soon. William lingered for a moment in the empty dining room as if thinking, and then called out calmly, Mrs. Whitmore. Whitmore turned in utterly. Your Highness, I need to speak with you and the steward privately, in the study. Moore smiled stiffly. Of course. Brix appeared almost immediately, as if he had been waiting behind a door. Your Highness said. William looked at them both. Now Anne stood near the service door, holding an empty tray. She felt her heart rise to her throat. If William confronted them harshly, everything would explode. And if it exploded, she would be the first to fall. Collins approached from behind and touched her elbow. Barely breathe, he whispered. Anne couldn't respond. A long time passed. The candles burned down. The other servants began to clear away. Han waited as if her body didn't know how to move until she heard quick footsteps in the hallway. It wasn't William, it was pale Mary. Anne, Mary said breathlessly, Mrs. Whitmore is furious. She came out of the office red-faced, and Briggs stayed inside and felt a twinge. And His Highness, Mary swallowed hard. He went out into the garden alone. Anne clutched the tray. He said something about me. Mary shook her head. No, but Whitmore asked where you were. I said you were tidying up. Anne closed her eyes for a second. Thank you. Mary looked at her fearfully. What's going on? Anne had no answer that wouldn't sink her. Nothing you can fix. Mary pressed her lips together. I don't want you to get fired. Anne looked at her in surprise. Mary always thought of herself first. But tonight she seemed different. Don't say anything, Anne asked softly. Please, Mary nodded, trembling. I won't say anything. Anne put down the tray and went out into the hallway. She walked carefully toward the door leading to the garden. She didn't want Whitmore to see her outside. The air was cold. She saw William standing near a tree without a coat, looking up at the sky as if he were measuring his patience. She hesitated. Then she approached him slowly. Your Highness, she said softly. William turned around immediately. His face was tense, but when he saw her, he lowered his guard a little. Anne, he said, and looked toward the house. You shouldn't be here alone. I'm not alone, she lied reflexively. Then she corrected herself wearily. Yes, I'm alone, but I needed to know what he did. William exhaled. I asked questions. I asked to see the account books tomorrow. I asked them to explain certain items to me. Nothing else. Anne felt a twinge of panic. That's a lot. William looked at her seriously. Why are you so afraid of them checking the accounts? Anne clenched her hands. The wind hit her fingers. Because they don't lose. They make sure someone else loses. William took a step closer without invading her space. Anne, tell me the truth. What are you protecting? Anne swallowed. Her chin trembled, but she forced herself to hold steady. I'm protecting someone. William frowned. Who? Anne hesitated. She looked toward the house as if the walls could hear my brother even from there. William stood still. He lives here. Anne shook her head. They don't have him tied down with debt, with papers. If I leave, if I speak out, they'll send him away. As an apprentice somewhere, I won't see him. And he's not strong. William clenched his jaw. Who has him like that? Anne closed her eyes for a second. I can't name names. William lowered his voice. I already suspect. Anne swallowed. You don't understand. It's not just my brother. It was proof, a piece of paper. I was hiding it, saving it for when I could, when someone would believe me. William stared at her. And that paper. Anne felt her chest tighten. It's gone. William didn't speak right away, just looked at her as if that loss were a blow to him too. Did they find it? He asked at last. Anne nodded. Oh, they took it. Today they took my locket too, as if I were a thief. William clenched his fists and then released them. He forced himself to breathe. This will end, he said. Anne let out a nervous laugh. Don't say that. I mean it, William insisted. But I'll do it right, not with shouting, not with humiliation. Anne looked at him suspiciously. How? William thought for a second. Tomorrow I'll send a letter to a legal advisor I trust, a discreet man. I'll ask him to tell me how to obtain legitimate copies of supplier records, payments, deliveries. If there's fraud, I don't need your hidden paper. I need evidence that can't disappear overnight. Anne felt a spark of hope and quickly crushed it. What if there's nothing? William held her gaze. There is something. I saw it in their faces when I asked simple questions. Anne swallowed hard. If you do that, they'll know it's me. William shook his head firmly. No, I'm not going to put you in the line of fire. And clenched her jaw. You can't promise that. William lowered his voice. I can promise that starting today, you won't go back to the barn. Anne stood still. William continued, measuredly. I ordered Whitmore to assign you a decent room into the service area. Not a punishment room, a room with a door that can't be locked from the outside. And I told Lord Harrow that I don't want to hear any complaints about you. And felt her chest tighten. That's too much. It's the least I deserve. William replied without hesitation. Anne looked down. They're going to hate me. They already hate you, William said with harsh frankness. The difference is that now they know I see you. Anne felt the world shifting beneath her feet. That sentence was the most dangerous of all. Don't say that, she pleaded almost in a whisper. William looked at her with a seriousness that made her tremble. And I'm not saying this to brag. I'm saying it because it's true and because you need to hear a truth different from the one you've been told for 5 years. Anne pressed her lips together. I didn't ask for this. I know, William said, but it's here now. There was a short silence. Anne looked at her red, tired hands. William spoke more softly. Your brother knows where you are. Anne shook her head. No, if he knew, he would feel guilty, and I don't want that. William nodded. Then we won't use it as a threat or an excuse. We'll use it as a reason to act with caution. Anne looked up. Why do you care? William paused for a moment, as if the question had disarmed him. Then he chose a safe path, because no one should live like this, he said, and felt something inside her want to believe him. It scared her. Go back, she said, pointing to the house with her chin. Before they noticed, William nodded. You too. And if one more tries to lock you up again, you tell me. Anne let out a dry laugh. How? Shouting in the hallway, William looked at her seriously. Mrs. Collins, she can tell me. I trust her. Anne swallowed hard. Collins was going to get in trouble because of her. I don't want to drag anyone down, Anne said. William replied without hesitation. You've already been dragged down. Now it's someone else's turn to carry some of the load for once. Anne looked down and her voice broke. I'm scared. William didn't touch her. He just stood there firmly. I know, but you're not alone in this anymore. Anne felt the air catch in her throat. She nodded once. They returned to the house through different doors so as not to arouse suspicion. That night, Whitmore didn't speak to her. He ignored her with a strange coldness, like someone quietly preparing something. Bricks didn't show up either. Collins took her aside in the kitchen. Did you speak to His Highness? Collins asked quietly. Anna nodded. Collins clenched his jaw and said that tomorrow he would demand an explanation, that he would write to an advisor saying that he would not return to the barn. Colin exhaled as if he had been holding his breath all day. Thank God, and lowered her voice even more. But they took my paper. I have nothing left. Collins stared at her. Then you stop carrying the burden alone. If he's going to do this by law and by signatures, so much the better. Anne swallowed, and Whitemore Collins made a gesture of contempt. Let him swallow his venom. That same night, for the first time in years, Anne went to the barn. Collins accompanied her to the servants' wing and knocked on a door. Mary opened it, surprised. And what are you doing here? Collins lifted his chin. New order. This room is being rearranged and sleeps here on the extra cot. Mary stood there with her mouth open. Who said so? Collins replied curtly. His Highness. Mary swallowed hard and stepped aside, not knowing whether to be happy or scared. Anne went in. The room was small, but it had real walls, a candle, a window that closed, and a cot that didn't creak with straw. Anne put the blanket on the floor and stood there, not knowing what to do with the space. Mary looked at her as if she were seeing a different person. Are you going to stay here? Anne felt slow. Mary lowered her voice nervously. Anne, what did you do? Anne looked at her. There was no anger in her eyes, only exhaustion. I'm still alive. Mary pressed her lips together. I didn't want anything to happen to you. Anne exhaled. Then don't say anything to anyone. Mary nodded, and for the first time she did so not out of gossip, but out of real fear. I won't say anything. Collins stood in the doorway for a second. Sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. Anna nodded. Collins closed the door. She sat down on the cot. She brought her hand to her neck again, out of habit. She felt the absence of the locket, but she also felt something new, the weight of a possibility. Outside in the main part of the house, William was writing a letter in firm, unadorned handwriting, addressed to a man who knew how to keep secrets and follow the law. Anna paid for the candle and for the first time in 5 winters allowed herself to close her eyes without listening to the wind blowing through the wood. The morning arrived with a strange silence, as if the whole house were holding its breath, and got up from the cot in the servants' quarters and took a second to remember where she was. Walls, a door, a window that closed. Mary was already awake, sitting with her knees to her chest. Did you sleep? Mary asked in a low voice, as if afraid someone would hear. A little, Anne said, not wanting to lie. She sat up and smoothed her hair. You? Mary shook her head. I dreamed that Mrs. Whitmore was pulling my arm and telling me I was next. Anne sighed. Don't say things like that. What if it's true? Mary pressed her lips together. Ever since His Highness looked at you, everything feels like the floor is moving. Anne stood up. Don't say that. Today I need the floor to be steady. Mary looked at her with genuine fear. Anne, are you leaving? Anne stood still for a moment. I can't. Mary swallowed hard and, His Highness. Anne cut her off with a gesture. Don't talk about him. Mary nodded, but her face said it was too late not to talk. In the kitchen, Collins was cutting bread with his jaw clenched. They're here, Collins said as soon as he saw Anne. Anne stopped. Who? 2 men. One of them is carrying a briefcase as if he were carrying the law inside. Collins lowered his voice. His Highness is already in the office, and felt her heart rise in her throat. Advisor Collins nodded. It must be him. He introduced himself by name and with a face that didn't believe in smiles. Mary, who was behind her, whispered, How scary. Collins glared at her. Fear is useless here. A closed mouth and quick hands are useful. Anne forced herself to move. She began preparing the trays as if serving you were the only important thing in the world. A waiter rushed past. Mrs. Whitmore is buzzing around like a wasp. Stay away from her. As if we wanted to, Collins muttered. It wasn't long before Whitmore appeared in the kitchen, stiff and pale-faced. Anne, she said without greeting. Anne looked up. Yes, ma'am. Whitmore pressed her lips together. His Highness requires you to serve in his office, and I want you to be very quiet. Mary tensed. Collins squeezed his spoon. Anne nodded, grabbed a tray of tea, and walked with firm steps. The steward's office was busier than ever. William was standing by the window with a letter in his hand. Lord Harrow sat too straight. Brigab was on the other side of the desk with a smooth face but tense eyes. And next to William was a middle-aged man, neat and cold-eyed. Anne, William said when he saw her, as if the name were something that protected her. Anne bowed her head. Your Highness. The man with the briefcase barely glanced at her, as if she were a piece of a puzzle. William noticed and said, Mr. Pembroke, she is part of the household. Do not treat her like a piece of furniture. The man named Pembroke bowed his head. Understood, Your Highness. Brix swallowed hard. Your Highness, I don't see why an employee should be present just because I say so, William replied without raising his voice. And because this matter concerns her. He set the tray down on a side table. His hands were steady, but inside he felt like he was falling. William pointed to the desk. I want to see the books, the supplier payments, the salaries and the maintenance expenses. Lord Harrow forced a smile. Of course, Your Highness. Brix quickly pulled out a notebook. Your Highness, those documents are kept in the archives. It will take time. Too much time has already been wasted, William said. Pembroke opened his briefcase. Excuse me, I have brought copies of receipts from 2 suppliers that Your Highness requested to be confirmed. The Turner family and the merchant from York. Brix blinked, and for the first time the shock was noticeable. Have you already been to them? Pembroke looked at him without emotion. They sent me documents by courier, dates, amounts, signatures, everything very clear. William took a sheet of paper and placed it on the desk. It says here that it was paid on February 8th. That payment doesn't appear in your book. Brix cleared his throat. It could be a copying error. Pembroke took out another sheet, and here is a letter from the merchant in York saying that he was paid in cash with his signature. Mr. Brix, meaning that the payment did exist, and felt the air tighten around her. What she had kept quiet was now there in fresh ink, no longer needing to be hidden. Lord Harrow shifted in his chair. Briggs, what does this mean? Briggs smiled too quickly. It means an employee could have made a mistake. I handle many accounts. William spoke with a calm edge. It does not mean that someone moved money without recording it properly, and that has consequences. Wilmore, who was standing in the doorway like a shadow, stepped forward with a stiff smile. Your Highness, with all due respect, perhaps this is an internal administrative matter. William looked at her. When an internal matter affects the dignity of employees, it ceases to be internal. Wilmore clenched his teeth. I don't see how one thing leads to the other. William took a step toward the desk. It leads to the other because fear feeds on secrets, and there are secrets here. Brix raised her hands, feigning calm. Your Highness, this has no connection to certain discomforts you believe you have seen. Anne felt Brix's gaze brush against her like a warning. William did not return Brix's gaze. He turned to Anne. Anne, he said carefully, I need you to answer something. Just yes or no. Someone in this house asked you to sign a note saying you took something that wasn't yours. Anne felt her throat close up. Moore stood still. Lord Harrow opened his eyes wide. Brix clenched his jaw. Anne looked at the floor. If she told the truth, she would expose herself. If she lied, she would betray herself. William lowered his voice. No one here is going to yell at you. No one is going to touch you. Just tell the truth. Anne took a deep breath. Yes, she said. They finally asked me. Lord Harrow put a hand to his forehead. What kind of brick? He hurried. Your Honor, it was a misunderstanding. We were just trying to keep order. Widmore intervened in a soft voice. The employee is dramatic, Your Highness. She likes to exaggerate to get attention. And felt anger rising, but she remained still. William stared at Widmore. Attention. A woman who has slept in a barn for 5 winters is not seeking attention. She is seeking survival. Lord Harrow stood up abruptly. Barn? What barn? Widmore paled slightly. Your Lordship, no. Answer me, Lord Harrow demanded, losing his composure for the first time. What barn is Your Highness talking about? Brix cleared his throat. Your Lordship, this is William, he interrupted. It's true, and if you didn't know, your ignorance does not exempt you from responsibility. Anne felt her chest burning. She had said that truth 1,000 times in her head, but hearing it from William's mouth made it real, and the reality hurt. Lord Harrow looked at Wilmore. It's true. Wilmore tried to keep a straight face. Your Honor, the girl sometimes stays where she shouldn't. I tried to correct her. Anne couldn't keep quiet. That's not true. Wilmore turned with a flash of anger. Shut up! William stepped in between them, not with force, but with presence. Don't talk to her like that. Moore pressed his lips together. Your Highness, you have only administered with cruelty, Pembroke said without raising his voice, glancing at papers. and that often goes hand in hand with shady accounts. Briggs tensed. That's an accusation. Pembroke held up a sheet of paper. It's not an observation based on records. Lord Harrow breathed as if in pain. Briggs, show me the entire book, now. Briggs opened his mouth, closed it, and finally moved toward a shelf. He took out a thick book and placed it on the table with stiff hands. William approached. Mr. Pembroke, check the marked entries. Pembroke flipped through the pages quickly. There's a missing entry here. There's a duplicate here. There's a different signature here. He looked up. This is no casual mistake. Briggs lost his smile. Your Highness, I have served this house for years. You served your own pocket, William replied, and felt dizzy. The room grew small. Lord Harrow slumped into his chair. How much? Briggs clenched his fists. Your Honor, no. How much? Lord Harrow repeated, lower, more dangerous. Pembroke spoke calmly. It still needs to be calculated, but there is a pattern, and there is one more thing. He took out a folded letter. The Turner family claims that 5 years ago, they tried to report irregularities. They sent a letter to this estate. The response was silence. Anne felt her stomach sink. 5 years. It all coincided with the beginning of her downfall. William looked at Han gently. That's what you were trying to keep hidden. Han closed his eyes for a second. Yes, Maud took a desperate step forward. That girl is making it up. Mary appeared at the door pale and blurted out unintentionally. She's not making it up. Everyone turned around. Mary trembled. I didn't want to, but I can't anymore. Moore glared at her. Mary took a step back, but Collins leaned behind her and held her by the shoulder. Let her speak, Collins said firmly. William nodded. Speak, Mary. Mary swallowed. The night Anne went to His Highness's room, Mrs. Whitmore was waiting for her, and then Mrs. Whitmore went out to the courtyard and went to the barn. Anne felt a rush of air. Mary looked at her with teary eyes. I'm sorry, but I saw her. I saw her reach into the corner. I thought she was hiding something to punish you. Whitmore let out a loud, ugly laugh, but quickly restrained himself. That's a lie. Mary shook her head. It's not a lie. And then I saw her come out with something folded up. A piece of paper. She was clutching it tightly and felt her legs go weak. William looked at Whitmore. Where is that paper? Whitmore clenched his jaw. I don't know what you're talking about. Pembroke spoke up. If she stole evidence, that makes the situation worse. Lord Harrow stood up abruptly. Whitmore, what did you do? Whitmore raised his chin defensively. I protected the house. You protected a crime, William said. Whitmore looked at William with contained hatred. You come here playing hero. You don't understand how the world works. William took a step closer. I do understand. That's why I'm going to change what I need to change. Moore opened his mouth, but Lord Harrow raised his hand. Enough, whore. You are relieved of your duties. Hand over the keys now. Whore froze. Your Honor, Lord Harrow repeated, his voice breaking with rage and shame. Moore looked at Briggs for support. Briggs looked down and felt a strange mixture of relief, fear, and disbelief. Moore, unable to help himself, pointed at Anne. This is all because of her silence, because of her martyr face. William replied without hesitation. This is all because of you, because of what you did when no one was looking. Moore clenched his teeth, turned on his heel, and left without another word. Lord Harrow ran a hand over his face. Briggs looked up, trapped. Your Honor, you're out too, boy. Lord Harrow said, his voice trembling. Hand over the books, keys, and documents today. Briggs took a desperate step forward. Your Honor, if you kick me out, people will find out. William looked at him coldly. They'll find out anyway, and not through gossip, but through records. Pembroke added calmly, and for damages. Briggs took a deep breath, his voice lowering. Do you want me to go bankrupt? William didn't enjoy the phrase. I want you to return what you took. I want you to leave those you used alone. And felt her chest tighten. My locket. Briggs looked at her with old contempt. Then he saw William and changed. He pulled the drawer out of the desk, trembling with rage, and left the locket on the table, almost throwing it. Anne was careful. Feeling the metal in her fingers, her eyes moistened. She didn't cry. She just clutched the chain as if she had finally recovered something that was more than an object. William looked at her. And your brother? He asked quietly. Anne swallowed. Tom, where's Tom? William insisted. Anne hesitated. Then she looked at Lord Harrow, at Pembroke, at Collins, who was standing in the doorway. She no longer had a hiding place, and perhaps she no longer needed one. In a workshop in the village, she said, "You owe your freedom to a debt that is not yours." Pembroke raised an eyebrow. "Are there documents for that debt?" Anne looked at Brigg. "He has them." Brigg clenched his jaw. "No." William took a step forward. "Yes." Lord Harrow pointed to the desk. "Briggs, open everything." Everything. Briggo opened another drawer. He took out some papers. Penrock took them. He looked them over quickly. "This is abusive," Pembroke said, without emotion, but harshly. "Inflated charges, questionable signatures. This can be overturned." Anne felt her chest loosen. "It can." Pembroke nodded, "with the backing of His Highness and Lord Harrow." "Yes." Lord Harrow swallowed, embarrassed. "It will be done." Today. Anne didn't know what to say. She remained silent, clutching the medallion. William spoke more softly. "Anne, look at me." Anne, she looked up. William wasn't smiling. His eyes were steady. "You will no longer beg for the bare minimum. Do you hear me?" Anne nodded, her throat tight. "Mr. Harrow," William said, turning his head slightly, "I want a formal statement clearing Anne's name, and I want her to be paid her full wages without any fabricated penalties." Lord Harrow nodded quickly. "Yes, Your Highness." "Yes," Pembroke added, "and a decent room in the service area on a permanent basis, with the key in the employee's possession. Not Mrs. Whitmore's." Lord Harrow nodded again, as if each yes were a half-hearted apology. Brick stood defeated, saying nothing. William approached Anne cautiously. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "Just walk." Anne let out a breath. "I don't know how." "I do," he replied, "and I'll walk with you." Anne felt a strange warmth in her chest, dangerous, beautiful, and at the same time impossible. After that day, the house was filled with papers, not screams. Pembroke spent several days reviewing accounts. Briggs was forced to return money. Lord Harrow wrote letters to suppliers with dry apologies. One more left without saying goodbye. The estate was reorganized as if someone had opened a window, and Tom returned. Hans saw him come in through the service door with his cap in his hand, his eyes wide with fear. "And," Tom said, as if he hadn't seen her in years, even though it had been months without hugs, and froze for a second, then ran to him without thinking and hugged him tightly, squeezing him as if he were about to disappear. "Are you here?" she whispered. Tom held on. "They told me I don't owe anything anymore, that it was a mistake," and closed her eyes. "It wasn't a mistake, it was a lie." Tom pulled away slightly and looked at her, confused. "And you? Why are they letting you stay here? Why not? Why didn't they kick you out?" Anne swallowed, looked down the hallway, saw William in the distance talking to Pembroke, and felt her breath catch. "Because someone saw me," she said at last. Tom followed her gaze and became serious. "That's the prince, that." Anne nodded, unable to speak. Tom became nervous. "You got yourself into trouble because of me." Anne shook her head vigorously. "No, Josh, I stayed for myself too, because it was only fair, because of what they did to us." Tom pressed his lips together. "Anne, I didn't want to." She cut him off gently. "It's over now." Colin approached and patted Tom on the back. "You eat today and eat well, and then see if you want to learn something decent here without false debt." Tom looked at her gratefully. "Thank you, ma'am." Collins grunted, feigning toughness. "Don't thank me. Be thankful the world didn't fall on top of you." Anne smiled slightly. For the first time, it was a real smile. That afternoon, William asked to talk to Anne, not secretly as before, but openly. Collins saw him and said nothing. Mary watched them from a window with wide eyes, but she said nothing either. Anne walked with the medallion under her collar, as always. Her back was straight out of habit, but now it was no longer a defense, it was dignity. William stopped near the tree where they had talked the night of the dinner. "Thank you for coming," said Gorsa. "I don't know if I should," Anne replied sincerely. William looked at her patiently. "I know, that's why I'm asking, not ordering," and clenched her hands. "What do you mean?" William took a deep breath. "We've already corrected several things, but one is missing." Anne frowned. "What's missing?" William lowered his voice. "What's missing is what happens between you and me." Anne felt her heart pounding. Nothing is happening. William smiled slightly. That's also a lie, and swallowed hard. Your Highness. William, he corrected her. When we're like this, call me William. Anne looked down, trembling inside. I can't. Why? Because you're a prince, she blurted out, the words coming out like a wall. Because I'm me, the one who slept in the barn. Because people don't forgive that. William took a step closer without touching her. People don't have to live your life, Anne looked up. But you live yours with them. William stood still, and for a second he looked tired. Yes, and that's why this is more difficult. Anne felt something inside her want to run away. William spoke slowly. A few days ago, I received a letter from my family. Anne clutched the locket reflexively. What does it say? That I should return to London? William let out a brief, joyless laugh. That there are commitments. That there is a promise. Anne looked at him, her throat tight. So this is over. William shook his head firmly. No, Anne blinked. You can't say no. I already said it, he replied. Anne felt the fear returning. And what happens to you if you say no? William looked at her honestly. I lose things, privileges, comforts, perhaps part of my position, but I don't lose who I am. Anne swallowed. In me, what do I lose? William moved close enough for Anne to feel his presence without invading her space. You don't lose. You choose. That's what I want. Anne felt tears welling up. She swallowed them back. William lowered his voice even further. And I don't want to be the man who looks at you one night in a barn and then leaves as if nothing happened. I can't, pressed her lips together. You don't know what it feels like to be seen as a thing. William shook his head. No, but I know what it feels like to live surrounded by suffocating rules. And I know what it feels like to look at someone and understand that if you don't do something, you become an accomplice. Anne breathed shakily. They'll criticize you. They already criticize me for existing, he replied. Let them criticize me for doing the right thing. Anne let out a nervous laugh. You talk as if it were easy. It's not, said William. That's why I'm telling you the truth. I'm not offering you a fairy tale. I'm offering you a path. Anne's voice broke. What path? William swallowed. I want to marry you. Anne gasped. You don't say that, she murmured. I say it because I don't want games, William replied. I don't want you to wonder if it's a whim. It's not. Anne took a step back as if the ground were burning. You're going to regret it, William shook his head firmly. No. Anna clenched her hands. You don't know me. William looked at her with serious tenderness. I saw you endure without asking for anything. I saw you defend your brother without using him as an excuse. I saw you tell the truth when it cost you everything. I saw you. That's enough for me to want to know you for the rest of my life. Anne felt her chest open up, and she was afraid. I have nothing, she said, and the words came out on their own. Old woman, William replied without hesitation. You have dignity, and that is worth more than my titles. Anne looked at him with disbelief and pain. Dignity doesn't pay for bread. No, William agreed, but respect does put bread on the table, and I won't let you go hungry again because of others. Anne swallowed hard. What if your family doesn't allow it? William took a deep breath. I've already asked for permission. It wasn't a fight, it was a decision. My uncle wrote back. My family isn't happy, but they accept one thing, that I fulfill my honor. An honor for them is that I make her my wife legitimately, without hiding her. Anne remained silent. Part of her wanted to believe it. Another part protected herself as always. What are you asking of me? William asked. He looked her in the eyes. Believe me when I say I love you and tell me if you can love me too. Anne felt the world sway. I don't know if I can. William didn't move. I'm not going to demand an answer today, but I need you to know this. If you say no, I'll still make sure you're okay. And your brother too. Anne looked at him and it disarmed her. Then why? Why are you taking this risk? William smiled slightly. Because I fell in love and because I don't want to live a proper life if it's empty. Anne felt the air tremble in her lungs. She was so quiet that you could hear the wind. William spoke very softly. And look at me. Anne looked at him. William slowly raised his hand, asking for permission with a gesture. He didn't touch her right away. He waited. Anne, her heart pounding, nodded slightly. William brushed the chain of the locket with his fingertips without pulling it, as if it were something sacred. They will never take away what is yours again. Anne let out a small sigh that made her angry. Don't cry, she said to herself softly. William smiled tenderly. If you cry, it won't break. It will be cleansed. Anne breathed shakily. Yoshi, I'm afraid it's a lie. William replied without hesitation. It's not. Anne clutched the locket. If I say yes, you won't see me as a favor. William shook his head seriously. Never. You are not a favor. You are my choice. Anne felt her throat close up again and, without knowing how, found herself saying what she had kept to herself for years. I chose you too, she whispered. William blinked as if he hadn't heard her correctly. What did you say? Anne swallowed and this time held her voice steady as she said, I chose you too, ever since you asked my name without mockery. William took a deep breath and his face softened as if a weight had been lifted from him. Then he said, leaning closer, Will you let me do it right? Anne nodded, and finally a smile trembled on her lips. Yes. What followed was not scandal, but a formal arrangement, a small ceremony, and a respect that surprised even the proudest. Lord Harrow, burdened with shame, contributed a modest dowry as reparation. Pembroke drafted clear documents. Tom was placed as an apprentice with fair pay and no debt. Collins received a raise and authority that no one dared question. Mary stopped trembling when walking through the halls. On the day of the ceremony, Anne wore borrowed jewelry and carried her locket. She wore a simple, clean dress, carefully made by the servants. Collins looked her up and down and nodded with shining eyes. Don't slouch, Collins ordered, but his voice was soft. Anne smiled. I can't. I forget how Tom approached nervously. You look like yourself. Anne hugged him. That was what she wanted. In the small chapel, William stood solemnly, his gaze fixed on the door. When Anne entered, he exhaled as if he could finally breathe. There was no grand music, no display, just a clear promise. The priest asked in a calm voice, Do you accept? William answered without waiting for the end. Yes. Anne let out a small, nervous laugh and then looked at William. He looked at her as if no one else existed. And you? The priest asked Han, and felt the world go silent again, like the barn at night, but without the cold. She looked at the medallion on her chest, looked at Tom, looked at Collins, and finally looked at William. Yes, said William. Controlling his emotions, he took her hand carefully, as if it were an oath. When they came out, there were no shouts or exaggerated celebrations, just smiles, glances, a strange peace. Anne walked with William to the backyard, away from prying eyes, for the first time without fear of being called reckless. She paused for a moment and turned toward the barn in the distance, dark. Still, William said nothing. He waited. Anne took a deep breath. I stayed there because I had no choice, she said softly, and because I thought that if I held out long enough, someone would believe me someday. William squeezed her hand. She was right. Anne stared at the barn for another second. Then she turned away, without tears, without resentment. It doesn't belong to me anymore, she murmured. William smiled. Now you belong to yourself. Annie exhaled, and this time it sounded like laughter. They walked toward the house, not as master and servant, but as two people together. Tom ran up to them. Where are we going? He asked excitedly. William looked at him warmly. To a good start. Tom laughed. What does that mean? And looked at William with a full and trembling heart. It means we're not just going to survive anymore. We're going to live. William looked at her as if he wanted to memorize her face. Ready to begin. Yes, thank you very much for listening to this story until the end. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed telling it. We would love to hear your opinion. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotions and lessons. And before we say goodbye, we want to remind you that a recommendation for another exciting and charming story will appear on the final screen. If you want to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you again for being here, and see you in the next story.